This is Destinations of the Damned.
Volterra Asylum in Tuscany, Italy, has been called the place of no return because thousands of patients sent there for treatment were never allowed to leave. People with mild psychiatric issues were mixed in with the criminally insane under brutal and barbaric conditions. But this site's history goes back further than the asylum's founding 135 years ago. For millennia, this hilltop has served as an inescapable destination with ancient burial sites, executions, and the town's history as the legendary birthplace of witchcraft. Is it possible that thousands of years of gruesome history cursed this land before the asylum was even constructed? The asylum's most mysterious patient, a man who went by the name NOF4, may have found a way to channel this dark energy. I'm sending my crew to Volterra, Italy, to find out.
My crew travels to the Tuscany region of Italy, to the walled mountaintop city of Volterra. They will rely on their guide and interpreter, Matteo, to help them navigate this investigation.
Italy, of course, is a very famously religious place.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church.
I think it's something that's really ingrained into Italian society and Italian culture, because we have like deep folklore everywhere around Italy. And actually, like, Volterra is the birthplace of the second pope in history.
In order to better understand the impact this region's ancient history had on the asylum, my crew meets with an archaeologist named Dario. Shockingly, he tells us the asylum complex was erected directly over a 3,000-year-old ancient necropolis called Poggio alla Croce, which means hills with the crosses.
Le prime attestazioni a Volterra risalgono al periodo neolitico, cioè circa 5.000-4.000 anni fa.
The tombs underneath the asylum aren't accessible.
Dario tells us that recently the 3,000-year-old tomb of a warrior was found near the building at the asylum.
We do know that the tombs weren't sealed, but sometimes they were also used for some rituals. We don't know what kind of rituals.
So the ground the asylum sits on was used for occult rituals and ancient tombs. Then, in the Middle Ages, the hill became an execution site.
The prisoners from Volterra's prison who were sentenced to death usually were executed on the Hill of the Crosses, probably by hanging.
The executions continued until the Volterra Asylum was built in 1888, sealing up or destroying most of the ancient tombs. During the 1950s and 60s, the facility expanded to become one of Italy's largest, accommodating a staggering 6,000 patients. Like many asylums from this era, in its earlier years, patients at the Volterra Psychiatric Hospital were subjected to horrible experimental treatments. The most infamous doctor at Volterra was Klaus Schilling. He later conducted malaria experiments on prisoners at the Dachau concentration camp during World War II. After the war, he was tried and condemned to death by hanging for his actions. Today, the asylum is being retaken by the forces of nature. However, the memory of the hospital lives on thanks largely to its most mysterious patient. To learn more about this fascinating figure, we meet with Andrea, whose father dedicated 30 years of his life as a nurse at the institution. He is an expert on the facility's most famous resident, Fernando Oresti Nannetti, also known as NOF4.
Which stands for Nannetti Oreste Fernando. And so it's basically his name with the addition of Oreste, which was a name that Fernando liked, but it wasn't his name.
Nannetti was born in Rome in 1927. He was abandoned by his mother at the age of 7, and from that point on, he spent most of his life institutionalized.
Negli anni 40 in uno dei pochi periodi che Fernando trascorre fuori, durante una manifestazione sul lavoro, lui sta manifestando, offende un carabiniere.
He was first sent to a psychiatric hospital in Rome, then transferred to Volterra in 1958. It was there that NOF4's behavior changed in ways some would describe as supernatural.
When Nannetti was transferred to Volterra, he didn't speak to anyone, so he stopped talking, and some nurses described his attitude as vacant mutism because he didn't speak to anyone, but he started scratching the walls of the courtyard with his belt.
Incredibly, NOF4 carved words, symbols, and drawings into the outside wall of his building using just a metal buckle, eventually covering a span the length of 2 football fields, nearly 600 feet. He chronicled emotions, life stories, and first-hand accounts of both observed and endured struggles during his extended stay at the hospital.
Lui considera che questo lavoro, quello di incidere questo muro, lo farà per circa 10 anni, dal 58 al 68.
Angelo Lippi formerly worked as a social worker at the asylum.
La mia opinione era che all'inizio mi sembrava il lavoro di un matto. Successivamente ho capito che invece era il lavoro di un artista.
Now, after his death and for what he did at the asylum, is considered one of the first and most important art brut artists in Italy and in Europe.
Art brut, or outsider art, is a term that describes works created by individuals isolated from society. But NOF4 is much too complicated to simply categorize as an artist. This enigmatic creature seemed to possess the ability to see into the future. He predicted the invention of cell phones, as well as the moon landing.
Cioè lui a un certo momento su una parete scrive, disegna un rettangolo e scrive di telefoni con antenne e quadrante televisivo. È una cosa che ovviamente se pensi che viene fatta negli anni 60 e i primi cellulari arrivano negli anni 70.
And also, 5 years prior to the moon landing, he wrote about the moon landing. He just approximated the date, and he was mistaken by only a few days.
Is it possible NOF4 was communicating with supernatural beings?
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
After 135 years, the Volterra Asylum is finally revealing its secrets. But some remain, like who or what was communicating telepathically with NOF4.
Cioè lui dice che quando è arrivata a Volterra lui è venuto così casualmente ma direttamente in contatto telepatico mentale con una realtà che non era veramente terrena, ma che comunque gli dettava cosa scrivere e gli dava la cadenza alle giornate. Lui diceva: io per non diventare matto, quando lui detta io.
But the question still remains. Who or what was Nannetti communicating with for so many years of his life? And does this entity still remain at the asylum? My film crew prepares to enter the facility for the first time. As the sun sets, they journey to the front gates to meet a local historian who will guide them through the massive grounds to NOF4's famous graffiti. Were his writings the work of a madman, or was he really communicating telepathically with supernatural beings?
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Alicia. Nice to meet you. I'm from Volterra. This is a place where usually we cannot go because it's closed. But as I live near here, I know it very well, and also because my grandfather and my grandfather and grandmother, they used to work here.
Alicia's grandparents were nurses at Volterra up until the 1980s, and with Alessandro, she maintains a huge online collection of documents and personal stories of former patients. Alicia leads my crew to the only surviving section of NOF4's graffiti at the asylum. Only about a quarter of his writing has survived time and the elements.
So these are the carvings?
Yeah. So let me explain how it works. So he used to do pages of his, it was like a diary.
As you can see, the pages are different. Some are smaller, some are bigger, and it depended simply on what he wanted to write. It all seems like a bunch of gibberish, basically. It is actually all understandable, and it was translated and put into a book.
L'elemento umano, la pagina finisce, si va a capo, si allunga e si accorre.
And so he didn't have space to write the full word, and so he had to go on another line.
He also wrote, I am an astronautical mining engineer in the mental system, and the ghosts are repellent. After its second appearance, it takes on material features, the shadows. They are alive under the cosmos, so the drawing imagines them. Was he trying to tell us he was seeing ghosts and shadow figures on the asylum grounds? This mural is the last surviving artifact of Nannetti's cryptic art at the asylum. The remaining walls were either destroyed by the weather or ended up being moved to a local museum because his graffiti is now considered a masterpiece in the outsider art world, also known as art brut. What was he trying to convey with his messages? Are these writings a creation of the unstable mind? Or is it possible he tapped into the energies of this town's history of witchcraft, dating back to the 14th century?